Hi everyone, hope you're well and welcome to my studio. A few days back I posted on social media that I would be doing an online tailoring class for you. Well, I thought this video would be a good introduction and a good place to start. I actually need a new suit for myself, so I thought I could demonstrate every single step that I take when I make a three-piece suit. Now the techniques that I'm going to be showing you are suitable for both menswear and womenswear, so why don't you follow me and make yourself a new suit. Best of all, the course is free. I'll be making quite a lot of videos to show every single step of the process, from drafting the pattern at the beginning to sewing on the last button. I'll also be going live on YouTube, well, now and again, and you can ask me questions or ask for guidance and I'll be there to help you. Of course, there'll be my regular blog posts as well. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe and also go and check out my blog at maledevonsewing.co.uk. Now, tailoring is often thought as a bit of a dark art and more complex than normal dressmaking or garment sewing. Yes, some techniques are different, but on the whole, it's pretty straightforward. The one thing that is different is time. It takes a lot of time to tailor well. There are a few things, of course, that will be different, and probably the reason for this video. There'll be tools and notions that we use in tailoring that you may not have even heard of or come across. You know, I thought this would be a good start to get you prepared by showing you the different things that we might need. For me, tailoring follows 5 steps. Number 1 is the design and the draft of the pattern. Okay, I know you might not want to draft your own yet, and that's fine. Just go and pick a commercial pattern that you like, and all the techniques that will be used, you can use with that. Number 2 is the layout, striking the pattern and cutting out the fabric. And exactly what it says, get the pattern onto the fabric, mark it all up and cut it out. Number 3, preparing the fabric. We need to prepare the fabric by doing what's called iron working, and that is exactly that, using the iron to stretch and shrink certain areas of the fabric so we get the desired shape at the end. Number 4, well, that's the actual construction bit, the fun bit, where we sit in front of the sewing machine and we put all the pieces together to end up with our finished garment. Finally, number 5 is the finishing. That's all the little details that go on at the end, so we end up with a really, really well-made garment. If you're going to be drafting your pattern, which is great, I hope you have a go at it, there are a few tools that you're going to need. Some of them you probably have already got, but there might be a few that you might think about getting now. First up, we need some paper. Pretty straightforward. I just use brown packaging paper. It's really, really cheap. You get lots of it on a roll, and it's quite wide, so you've got enough space to draft a pattern on. I've got a metre rule, wooden one, and I've also got a wooden square. Really useful. You can't really do a lot without at least a rule and a square. I've also got a range of French curves. Now these come from various companies. It's worth at least getting one, if not more than one, because the curves on a French curve for each different make are slightly different, and you might find that actually this particular French curve works better for drafting trousers, this one works better for drafting a jacket, and so on, and you'll just learn that and you'll get the experience as you go. Another good tool is what's called a hip curve, and it's exactly that. It's for curves on hips. It's also good for lapels and other shallow curves that you might come across when drafting. Obviously you'll need pencils, pens, marker pens, whatever you're going to use. I quite often start with a pencil. I'll then go over it with a marker pen. I might use different colours for different parts of the pattern just to keep everything clear. A calculator, okay, unless you're really good at maths, a calculator is a must because you're going to be working out quotients of sizes. In other words, you'll be wanting 1/5 of your neck circumference, etc., etc., and it's a lot easier on a calculator. Paper scissors, not your best fabric scissors, obviously, or a rotary cutter, whatever you're happy to use. I quite often use a small rotary cutter just for cutting out the pattern pieces because it's quick and simple. A pattern notcher. It's a really, really good little tool, and it's for, as it says, putting notches in your pattern. So along your edges where you might have your balance marks for your sleeves or side seams, you can snip with the pattern notcher and it makes a nice little notch. Now, I never ever snip into the fabric at a notch or a balance mark because it can weaken the fabric, obviously. But when you use a pattern notcher on your paper, it gives you a nice area that you can put some tailor tacks in, so you've got them there all the time. There's a twist drill or twist punch. Comes with various different sizes of hole punches on the end. That's really good for marking, for example, the start of a dart, the end of a dart, pocket placements and things like that. If you're going to keep your patterns safe, I always hang mine up. If you've got space, that's great. So you can get yourself some pattern hooks, or do what I do because I'm a bit of a cheapskate. I go and buy cheap tent pegs and I just bend a loop on the other end from the top of the tent peg, and then I can use them to hang them up. The next step of the process is to take our pattern and transfer it to the cloth. Nothing really complicated there, and there's not a lot of tools that we need. However, some of the tailoring techniques are a little bit different than what you may have come across when dressmaking before. We'll start off with pattern weights. I've got a range of pattern weights here, and they are nothing more than thick pieces of steel with a little knob on the top so I can pick them up. I made them myself. They're very, very cheap. If you don't have pattern weights, there are other things you can use instead. For example, a tin of baked beans. Get a few tins of baked beans to put on. You could use some thick, heavy washers. Again, really cheap to buy. The reason we use pattern weights as opposed to pins, which you might be used to doing, is that whenever you put a pin in, you're actually distorting the fabric, and you're working probably with 2 layers of fabric at a time. So when you then go to cut, you're going to end up with a slightly inaccurate cut. So pattern weights are really, really useful. The next thing, tailor's chalk. Now, you know, it's called tailor's chalk because tailors use it. You may not have ever used tailor's chalk before, really. It's invaluable because it allows you to mark everything you need to do onto your cloth. Tailor's chalk, as the name suggests, is a chalk-based substance. There's also a thing called tailor's soap. Tailor's soap is a bit more like a wax, and unlike chalk, the wax, when you heat it, it vanishes, it melts, it disappears completely. Try it first on a piece of fabric before you actually use it, just to make sure it doesn't leave a mark. I've used it on some lining fabric before and it's left a very, very faint line where I've used it, so just be careful. Tailor's chalk, great, not a problem. However, if you're going to use tailor's chalk, you'll need a good stiff brush. Okay, the only way you can really remove tailor's chalk is by brushing it off the cloth. You can flick it with your fingers, but a brush works better. And never ever iron over the top of tailor's chalk, because it's then really hard to remove. If you've got chalk, then it's a really good idea to have a sharpener. You can buy sharpeners, this plastic one. I don't find that they last very long because they're made of plastic. They tend to wear, so you don't end up with a really, really crisp edge on your chalk. You could use chalk marker pens if you like them. I've never used one because I've always found chalk to work as it is. I made my own sharpener, which is a little tiny wooden box which has got 5 or 6 Stanley blades inside, glued in there at an angle, and I can just rub my chalk over the top to sharpen. The thing about using a sharpener like that is I like to keep the chalk dust. I've got a little pot and I keep all my chalk dust in it because this is really useful for marking points on your fabric. Remember I said before about using the twist punch drill, so you mark little holes in your pattern. you can take some chalk and rub it through the holes, and then when you take your pattern away, you'll see all those marks. So it's really, really quick and easy to use. Obviously you're going to need some shears to cut out, and I'm going to say shears because I personally don't use a rotary cutter. I find it distorts the fabric and I get more control with shears. If you want to use a rotary cutter, that's fine. I'm not telling you you're wrong. You do whatever you feel more comfortable using. I've got 3 here, 13 inch, 10 inch and an 8 inch pair of shears. Obviously the 13 inch is for doing the big cuts, 10 for the less big cuts, and the 8's for sharp curves and things. You'll also need basting thread. Now in tailoring, and you've probably seen jackets with lots and lots of white thread all over it, you'll need lots of basting thread. Okay, it's a soft cotton, it's easy to break, you can literally snap it in your fingers. It's slightly fluffy, which means that it sticks into the fabric, so it holds everything in place nicely, but it's easy to remove. Also, if you press over the top, it doesn't leave a mark where the thread has been. Gutermann make what they call attacking thread, which is really nice. It comes in several colours. There's also big rolls of Gunsoft, this is called. It's not expensive, it's worth buying. I mean, I couldn't live without a big one. I'd use a whole one of those on a suit, if not more. Pick up a good thing of basting thread. And of course, if you're going to use basting thread, you need some hand needles. Get yourself a good brand. Don't buy cheap stuff from the local convenience store. Good needles are not expensive. I always use John James. Have done for a long, long time because they're very good. They're very consistent. For basting, I always use long darners. So they're long needles. You can see the length of that, as opposed to shorter needles. It just means you can go through and you can baste things really, really quickly. You can put tailor's tacks in very, very quickly. So moving on to iron working, and that's the stage where we have cut out all our cloth and we need to give it some shape. We need to stretch a few parts, we need to shrink a few parts of the cloth just to get that really, really good tailored shape. Again, nothing complicated, and you've probably got most of these items anyway. First up, of course, is an iron. It doesn't need to be a fancy iron like I've got. Any good quality iron will do. As long as it gets hot, it's going to work. It doesn't have to be a fancy steam iron or anything else, just an iron that gets hot. The only reason I've got this machine is the fact that this is turned on sometimes 12 hours a day. It's very, very reliable, but then it costs a lot of money. Okay, pressing cloths. You need something to press your fabric to protect it. I've got a range from lightweight cottons, silk organza, wool, whatever, and I tend to use the same type of fabric as a pressing cloth that I'm pressing. So if I'm pressing wool, I'll use a wool pressing cloth. If I'm pressing my linings, I'll use the silk. If I'm pressing canvas, I'll probably use some cotton. Really, really important so you don't damage anything as you're pressing. A squirty bottle, really useful, only has to be small, that you can spray water onto your fabric, then use your hot iron. You don't need to use steam because that will create the steam as you're pressing. A dauber, it's nothing more than, 3 inches by 12 inches of wool that you wrap around itself, make yourself a little cylinder, slip stitch it into place, and that's used alongside a pot with some water in, and you can put the water onto your cloth exactly where you need it. So where you need that steam, you can make sure it's accurate. This little pot is a bottle of 100% spearmint oil. You might think, why do you need spearmint oil? You've probably seen adverts for these press easy things, you know, the liquids that you can spray on to help you press. All you need is some spearmint oil. You can get it from health food shops. It's really, really cheap. You put a few drops into your pot or a few drops into your squirty bottle, and it really, really helps. It makes a really crisp, clean press. It also smells really nice. So that covers the ironworking, but I thought while I'm here, let's talk about the fact that when we move on and start constructing, you're going to be pressing a lot. You know that. Pressing probably takes up as much time as sitting in front of the sewing machine. So you've got all these things already, that's great. But there's a couple of other things that are really useful, especially in tailoring. A tailor's ham. If you haven't got one, make one. Don't go and buy one, because the ones you buy are far too small. A proper tailor's ham, much, much bigger. Now, I've got a pattern for this. You can download it free off of my blog. You need something big with a nice gentle curve for doing the fronts of your lapels, fronts of jackets. The smaller one's good for doing the tighter curves on the inseams, etc. Like I say, they're so easy to make and they cost pennies to make. They're stuffed with wood chips, sawdust like you get for your pets. So just go and make one. Also, a sausage, a sleeve, ham, whatever you want to call it. Again, just go and make one, don't buy one. Nothing more than for putting into the sleeves when you're pressing seams open, or any really tight curves. I use this quite a lot for doing collars, because you can put your collar across it and you can press and press and press. It's really, really useful. Another tailoring tool is a clapper. It's nothing more than a really, really solid piece of wood. Use something that's very, very tightly grained, because it's going to be hitting the seams. The seams will be full of steam. You don't want this to go all horrible and distorted and get nasty. This is actually made from an old chopping board that fell apart. There's 4 layers of the chopping board. I just screwed them together, cut round the shape and sanded it off, and it's worked for me for years and years and years. You perhaps on your seam you will put your water in, you'll then press it, and then you'll clap it, and that will give you a really, really crisp, clean seam. Another tool, it's not as vital, certainly the clapper is really good, but you can get a thing called a point presser or tailor's presser. It's got various shapes and curves, points on there. You can use it this way. It's good for pressing all the really awkward things. You know, you're making pockets and you need to press the corners of pocket flaps. You can use that bit. You can use this bit to go over your shoulder seams when you need to press those open. It's good to have, but if you haven't got one, you can do without it. Have a look online, you can pick them up. They're not expensive. Moving on to the fun part, that's the construction. We've drafted or used a pattern. We've cut our cloths, we've ironworked, we've got everything ready. We can now start to put things together. And there's not really that many other pieces of equipment that you'll need. Yes, you'll need a sewing machine, okay? It doesn't matter what sewing machine you use, as long as it can form a neat, straight stitch. That's it. There's no complicated, posh stitches involved. A straight stitch is all you need. I've been known to use my Singer from 1950s right up to my Janome, which is pretty modern and it's got hundreds of stitches, but it just needs to stitch in a straight line. That's it, end of story. We've covered using your iron, we've discussed that in the last part, Yes, you'll need an iron, and you know that when you sew, you spend more time at your iron than you do at your sewing machine sometimes. But there are a couple of things that you will find really useful when tailoring. Basting thread, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Get as much as you can because you're going to use lots of it. Silk thread. Okay, a lot of tailored stuff uses silk thread, and 99.9% of it is never seen, but it's a really, really good thread to use. You can buy skeins of silk, just general purpose silk thread. It's not overly expensive. You can buy it by, I don't know, 750 meters, I think. You can buy skeins of this. It's really good for doing all the stitches on your canvassing, in your collar and everywhere else, in your trousers, around the waistband or your skirt waistband, whatever. It's just really good to use. It doesn't twist and it's well worth the money. Also, some fine silk thread. This is kimono silk. It's very, very fine. It's good for attaching linings because your linings you're going to put in by hand. You're not going to sew them on a machine. Needles. I'll go into more detail about needles. I'll do a blog post about them. There are two types of needles that we use. Again, I'm using John James. Sharps and betweens. Sometimes they're called quilting needles. Sharps are obviously sharp, but they're longer, they're slightly fatter. Betweens are very much finer, they're shorter, and they're good for doing delicate work. Some thread snips or some small scissors, really useful. A pair of tweezers. They are more useful than you think. This is called a stiletto awl. It's basically a pointy thing for making holes. It's really useful. You can't do a lot of hand sewing without a tailor's thimble. So this is an open-ended tailor's thimble. I have still got some on my website. Go to my blog if you need one. I've still got a few left. They're invaluable. It's open-ended. As I say, it just gives you that much more control. Your finger doesn't sweat in it. You can feel the cloth. You don't have to keep taking it off and on like you would with the closed end thimble. One little tip, if you have got a thimble or if you're going to buy a thimble, when you buy them they're round. Your finger's not round, and we normally place it on the middle finger. Put it onto a table and press it down with a hammer or something hard and squish it into a bit of an oval shape so it fits on your finger really comfortably. Chisels. Now you can buy buttonhole chisels. I just went and got these from a really, I don't know where I got them. They were very, very cheap. A set of 4 chisels. Open up your buttonholes and things like that. It's much better than using a pair of scissors. You don't risk the chance of ruining what you've just done. Finally, a seam ripper just in case. You won't need it. So there we go, guys. My first video of my course. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learnt something from it. If you've got any questions, please do comment. Go over to my blog. You can ask me questions there, not a problem. The next video I'm going to put out will be looking at our cloth choice. We'll look at interfacings, interlinings, collar canvases and all the other bits that are associated with making a tailored garment. So until next time, happy sewing.